Hi, my name is Sam, and this story happened about 2 years ago. I'm 27 now and work a pretty stressful job as a sales manager for a tech company. Back then, I was feeling completely burnt out. I had been working crazy hours, and my social life was basically non-existent. That's when my buddy David suggested we do something different, go camping. Neither of us had ever been camping before, but it sounded like a fun way to get away from all the noise and chaos of life. We decided to drive out to a state park about 3 hours from home. It wasn't anything too extreme, just a well-known camping spot where we could park the car nearby and set up a tent in the woods. We figured it would be simple enough for beginners. When we got there, it was late afternoon. The sun was just starting to set, and the forest had this quiet, serene vibe. We picked a spot not too far from the car but still deep enough into the woods to feel secluded. Setting up the tent was a bit of a comedy routine since neither of us had done it before, but eventually, we got it standing. Once the tent was up, we cracked open a couple of beers and sat around the little fire we had built. It was actually kind of nice, just the two of us chatting, joking around, and enjoying the sound of nature. That was until we started hearing something. It wasn't loud at first, just the occasional crunch of leaves a little way off in the woods. At first, we laughed it off, assuming it was just a deer or some other harmless animal. But as the night wore on, the sounds started getting closer. There was this unmistakable rhythm to it, slow, deliberate footsteps, crunching leaves one at a time. David joked, maybe it's Bigfoot, trying to lighten the mood, but I could tell he was a little uneasy too. I tried shining my flashlight in the direction of the sound, but all we could see were trees. Eventually, the footsteps stopped altogether, and we figured whatever it was had moved on. We decided to call it a night and climbed into the tent. It was pitch black inside, and the only sound was the faint rustling of the wind through the trees. I must have dozed off for a while because the next thing I remember was waking up to the sound of movement outside the tent. At first, I thought it was David, but then I realized he was still lying next to me, breathing softly. My heart started racing as I listened closely. The crunching footsteps were back, and they were right outside the tent. I nudged David awake and whispered, "Someone's out there." He sat up, wide-eyed, and we both froze, listening. That's when the zipper of the tent started to move, just a little, but enough to make my blood run cold. David grabbed the flashlight and unzipped the tent in one swift motion. Standing just a few feet away was a man. He was tall and thin, wearing dirty clothes, and his face was partially obscured by a hood. He wasn't holding anything, but the way he was just standing there, staring at us, was unnerving. David yelled, "Hey! What the hell are you doing?" The guy didn't say a word. He just stood there for a moment longer, then turned and bolted into the woods. We didn't sleep the rest of the night. We sat there, keeping the flashlight on and clutching a couple of pocket knives we had brought for camping. At first light, we packed up everything as fast as we could and got out of there. To this day, I have no idea who that man was or what he wanted. Maybe he was just some drifter looking for a place to sleep, or maybe it was something more sinister. Either way, I'll never forget the way he stood there, silently staring at us. Now, it's just a memory, but it's enough to make me think twice about ever going camping again. Hi, my name is Jeff. I'm 34, and this story happened last year during hunting season. I work as a mechanic, which, as you can imagine, is a pretty demanding job. Long hours, grease everywhere, and not much time to unwind. Life had been weighing me down, and I needed a break. Hunting has always been my way of escaping. Just me, my dog Charlie, and the wilderness. Charlie's my 3-year-old Labrador, and he's as loyal as they come. I got him as a pup, and we've been inseparable ever since. He loves the outdoors as much as I do, so when hunting season rolled around, I decided to pack up the truck and head out to a secluded spot about 2 hours from home. It's a place I've hunted before, dense woods, no cell service, and hardly anyone around. Perfect. We got there early in the morning, just as the sun was starting to rise. The air was crisp, and the forest was alive with the sounds of birds and rustling leaves. Charlie was excited, wagging his tail as we set up camp and geared up for the hunt. I had my rifle, a backpack with some supplies, and a cooler for any game we might bring back. We didn't have to wait long before I spotted a deer. It wasn't the biggest buck I'd ever seen, but it was a clean shot. I took it, and the deer dropped a few yards away. Charlie, usually calm and fearless, suddenly froze. His ears perked up, and a low whimper escaped him. That was unusual for him. Charlie's never scared. I looked around but didn't see anything. The woods were quiet, too quiet. I grabbed the deer, loaded it into the truck, and decided to head back to camp. The whole walk back, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Charlie stayed close to my side, his tail tucked between his legs. Back at camp, I tried to shake off the unease. I cooked up some of the venison for Charlie and myself. The warm meal and the crackling fire helped, but I still felt like something was out there, watching. Charlie seemed to sense it too. He kept glancing toward the tree-line, his ears twitching at every little sound. The afternoon passed uneventfully, but as the sun started to set, the forest came alive with strange noises. Twigs snapping, leaves crunching, like something big was moving around out there. I told myself it was just a deer or maybe a raccoon, but the feeling of being watched only got stronger. By the time night fell, I was on edge. Charlie stayed close to me, refusing to wander like he usually does. I decided to call it a night and climbed into the tent with Charlie curling up at my feet. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up to a deep, guttural growl. It wasn't Charlie. He was lying completely still, his body rigid with fear. My heart was pounding as I listened. Heavy footsteps were circling the tent, slow and deliberate. Whatever it was big. I reached for my flashlight and rifle, my hands shaking. I didn't want to make a sound, but I had to know what was out there. Slowly, I unzipped a small corner of the tent and peeked out. Standing just a few feet away was a massive black bear. Its fur glistened in the moonlight, and its sheer size was terrifying. It sniffed the air, turning its head toward the tent. My grip tightened on the rifle, but I didn't dare move. Charlie didn't either. He just lay there, silent and terrified. The bear lingered for what felt like an eternity before finally losing interest and lumbering off into the woods. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. Every sound, every rustle of leaves made my heart race. As soon as the sun came up, I packed up camp and got out of there. I've been hunting for years, and I've seen bears before, but this was different. The way it moved, the way it seemed so aware of us, it was like it was testing us, trying to decide whether we were worth the trouble. Now, it's just a memory, but every time I think about that night, I wonder what would have happened if I had made a noise or if Charlie had barked. That trip reminded me just how wild and unpredictable nature can be. And it's a memory I'll never forget. Hey, my name's Mark. I'm 29, and this story happened just a few months ago during a camping trip with my friends Jimmy and David. I work in IT, which means a lot of long hours in front of a computer and not much fresh air. Jimmy and David have been my best friends since high school, and we've been talking about doing a fishing trip for years. Life just kept getting in the way, until this summer, when we finally set aside a weekend to get out there. We decided to camp near a lake a few hours away from home. It was a secluded spot Jimmy had heard about from his uncle, perfect for fishing and getting away from the noise of daily life. We packed up the truck with our tents, gear, and enough food and beer to last us a few days. The first day was perfect. The weather was great, the lake was calm, and the three of us were in high spirits. Jimmy, being the competitive guy he is, turned the fishing into a contest. Whoever caught the biggest fish would get free drinks the next time we hit the bar. David and I were all in. By the end of the afternoon, Jimmy was in the lead with a massive catfish he'd pulled in earlier. David caught a decent-sized bass, and I managed to snag a salmon just before we wrapped up for the day. We headed back to camp, laughing and joking as we carried our catches. We cooked the fish over the fire that evening, and man, it was good. There's something about eating what you've caught yourself that just hits different. We were sitting around, drinking beer, and talking about life when we heard it, a gunshot. It was distant, but unmistakable. The three of us froze, our eyes scanning the darkness around us. Jimmy tried to play it off, saying it was probably just some hunter, but David and I weren't so sure. It was too close to camp for comfort. We decided to call it a night, but none of us slept well. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig made us jump. By morning, we were all a little on edge but agreed not to let it ruin the trip. That night, we decided to do some nighttime fishing. Jimmy had brought a pair of night vision goggles as a joke, but we figured they might actually come in handy. We took turns using them, scanning the lake and the surrounding woods. It was during my turn with the goggles that I saw it. A small boat had appeared on the far side of the lake. There were 2 people in it, and they were acting strange. They weren't fishing or moving around much. Instead, they seemed to be focused on something heavy they were pulling out of the boat. I froze as I watched them lift what looked like a large, human-shaped bag. They dropped it into the water with a splash that echoed across the lake. My stomach turned, and I handed the goggles to Jimmy without saying a word. "What the hell?" he muttered as he watched. David took a turn, his face pale as he lowered the goggles. We decided to stay quiet and act normal, like we hadn't seen anything. Jimmy tucked the goggles away, and we all pretended to be focused on our fishing rods. The boat started moving toward our side of the lake, and for a moment, I thought they'd seen us watching. But after a few tense minutes, they turned around and disappeared into the night. We packed up and headed back to camp, our nerves shot. No one said much, but we all knew we'd seen something we weren't supposed to. The next morning, we made the decision to call the police. It wasn't an easy choice. We didn't want to get involved in something dangerous, but we couldn't just ignore what we'd seen. We drove into town and made the call, telling them about the boat, the bag, and the gunshot we'd heard. The police took it seriously and sent a team out to investigate. Later that day, they found the spot where the boat had been, and sure enough, they recovered a body and a gun from the lake. We didn't stick around to learn all the details. The cops thanked us for reporting it, but they didn't tell us much else. All we know is that an investigation is still ongoing. Now, it's just a memory, a haunting one I can't shake. I keep replaying that night in my head, wondering who those people were and why they did what they did. Sometimes I think about how close we were to being noticed and how differently things could have turned out. The next time someone suggests a fishing trip, I think I'll pass. Some things, once seen, can never be unseen.